Welcome to our 9th mission. Joshua had led the children of Israel in conquering the land that would become their home. They had elected a king, Saul, but they would face off against a Philistine army. Now Saul would bring his army, but this isn't about him. This mission is focused on the next king. This is the beginning of his journey. That is a young shepherd boy, David. And he is entering a battlefield, that is the Valley of Elah, where the Philistines and the Israelites would face off. And he is simply checking up on his brothers in the army, yet he's going to get wrangled into something that he did not expect. Let's not waste any time, but let's be careful, as this is a war zone. Are you ready, agents? Let's go. Here we are. Let's let's see what the situation is all about. In 1 Samuel 17:3, and the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. Why didn't these armies come together in the middle of the valley? Because it is easier to stay on the hill and wait for the enemy to come up to you, tire themselves out, so that you have the advantage. However, both of these armies know this plan, this idea. Neither one wants to give up their advantage. However, the Philistines are offering a solution. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. We had learned about cubits with Noah, from about 18 or 20 inches. To save you some math, this is about 9.5 feet. But he's no lanky basketball player. This giant is big and strong. His armor, as the following verses tell, is about 120 pounds, not including his spear. This man is big, he's strong, he's covered in armor. He's a foe to face. Yet, his challenge is if any one man from Israel can come out and face him and win, the Philistines will surrender. But if he wins, the Israelites must surrender. If you stood next to your parents and looked up at them, that's about what the adult would look like looking up at Goliath. If they were about 5'8", 5'9", they would meet maybe his hip or about his midsection. They would seem almost as children against Goliath. However, here comes David, and he hears this challenge. He's going straight to King Saul's tent. Let's follow him. Verse 32. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." The only person to accept this challenge is a young shepherd boy. He didn't come expecting to fight. He was coming to visit his older brothers, those who were old enough, big enough, to join the army. He's a simple shepherd, yet he's the only one willing to fight this Philistine. Now, Saul won't let him go empty-handed, as he is. He's going to give him his best armor, his best sword. Yet, let's see David's response. In verse 39, and David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a script, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Now, why did he leave off the armor and sword? Would not that be better? Well, a sword is not as easy to just pick up. He's not used to the weight. He hasn't practiced the techniques. The sword would probably be useless to him in a fight. He'd need to stick with what he knows. But what about the armor? Surely that would protect him if Goliath got close. But the sling needs a lot of arm movement and shoulder movement. You need to wind up and then release a stone quickly. The armor, it doesn't fit to him, and it's heavier than he's used to. It would probably weigh him down and slow him down, and thus burden him more than help him. So he puts it off and goes to face the Philistines in what he brought with him. Now let's see what he has to say to the Philistine. Verse 46, this day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. Verse 47, and all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So David is facing against this giant, yet he has confidence that God will bring the victory. He has a stone in a sling, and this is a fully armored giant. A smooth rock wouldn't do much against his armor. He would have to be very accurate to find any weak point in his armor. But let's see what happens. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. With one motion, David took that giant down to the ground. God used probably the weakest boy or the smallest person for the job. The worst possible person. He wasn't even in the army training with them. And the weapon that is very difficult to master. And it's not the best in a situation against an armored giant. Even a good slinger would have a difficult time finding the weak spot and actually hitting it. Yet David did it. God used possibly the worst person, the smallest person for the job, and the least likely weapon to beat an armored giant. Probably the strongest of warriors. If God is that mighty that he doesn't even need a sword or a spear to take down that giant, surely he can face anything with whatever Israel has. Surely Israel will not leave God, will not leave that kind of might and rely on their own strength. Well, it seems like they are in good standing and can win any fight that comes against them. Let's return to the HQ and recap on what we've learned. From what we learned today, who was our main person of interest? That was David. And where did this fight take place? In the Valley of Elah. And how would you describe this battle, this event? We could say David defeats Goliath, or perhaps to draw some similarity to Joshua and Jericho, another great foe that was defeated by a simple tactic. We could say the giant falls. Either way is a good description and summary of what we've seen today. You've done good work today, agents. Mark the gray box for a mission accomplished. And until next time, farewell.